You can't turn and say, oh, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean it. When I made the pledge, I wasn't thinking right. Or I had a job, now I've lost the job. It doesn't work like that. And it's very important for us to fulfill what we have begun. And that's what the Apostle Paul is saying. Paul is saying, fulfill, complete that which you have started. And that's what we looked at last week. And so Paul kept on challenging them in various aspects. In verse 7, he said, I want you to excel in everything, in faith, in speech. He says, in knowledge, he says, just as you have excelled in speech, just as you have excelled in faith. Many of us are growing in faith. Many of us are growing in speech. Our talking is getting cleaner, and we are careful with what we say. Our faith levels are growing. We are growing in knowledge. But he says, you know what? I also want you to excel in the grace of giving. And then he goes ahead in verse 8 by saying, I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the eagerness of others. Again, that's what he's saying. I'm comparing your sincerity of love with the eagerness of others. And like I said, sometimes it's okay to compare notes. You could think you're doing very well until you compare notes. You get to realize, you know what? You guys need to step up. I was at one of the Bible schools I'll not mention, talking to pastors, and I'm dealing with stories in the Bible. I'm teaching Old Testament backgrounds, and sometimes I will pick, like I was dealing with Corinthians. In fact, I'm dealing with Paul's letters. So last week I was dealing with Corinthians, and I didn't even open my Bible. I began to give them chapter by chapter, summarizing everything, assuming they had read their Bibles. I asked them, how many of you have read? 2 hands went up. They've never read Corinthians. Last week, how many of you have read Romans? I was once in Rwanda and talking to a church where you have, I think about, 30 students, bishops, big cars parked out there, elderly guys coming to study what we would call the Johnian, literature, which is the Gospel of John. How many of you have read John? Bishop, 30 years in ministry. About 5 hands up. And you're wondering, what are you teaching the church? You're pastors, bishops. You're telling me in the 20, 30 years you've not read the Gospel of John. And like with this Bible school, it was just to not make them feel bad. But I tell them, listen, my kids have read the whole Bible. He said, my kids. 13, 14, when they were 14, I think Riley had finished by 14 years. You are done. Richard and Sandy, they have been. I said, you guys can't be serious. I told them, at least I know Riley has completed the Bible, and I think Richard and Sandy, they should have, if anything, read through the Bible. And it was just to make them, stir them up and say, you know what, you can't do this. You can't be serious. You're pastors and leaders and you've not read your Bible. So, Paul does make those comparisons. Don't make them feel bad, but just to say, listen, I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the eagerness of others. And then, of course, if you go down, he does say a number of things. So I'm just reflecting what we did last week. Today, we are going to continue, and the method I'm using is what I call a running commentary, meaning that there's no point 1, 2, or 3. I read and comment as we go along. So it's a running commentary. Sometimes I'll break them down into points, but this time I thought I would do verse by verse, and this is Bible study, so it's okay. Now, verse 16, and we are continuing with what I would call the Jerusalem project. He's dealing with raising money for the Jerusalem project. The church in Jerusalem is struggling. Apostle Paul is raising support. And just for us to understand, that it is in order for a local assembly, a church, to raise support and support another struggling church. We came from Kitgum, and you remember on Sunday I did ask and made an appeal that anyone who feels led to contribute towards the podium for the church, in Kitgum, please see me. And thank God someone, contributed, gave the whole 150. In fact, it was sent. And so, praise the Lord. Let's give the Lord a hand clap. You see, the thing is, some churches around us, we may think we are doing bad. Like I told you, you go up there and you find a church using a jerry can for a drum. And so sometimes the Lord will place it upon your heart to pay forward because others have been kind to us. And God says, listen, you don't have to complain that you don't have much, but you can always set aside something to be a blessing to another church that may be struggling. And that's what was happening here. Paul was raising money to support the Jerusalem church. They didn't forget their roots because that was the headquarters. Now, verse 16, and I'm going to use NIV, and you can follow whatever translation is up there. But if you have your Bibles, I would encourage you to read your own Bibles and do some underlining. He says, I thank God who put into the heart of Titus the same concern I have for you. For Titus not only welcomed our appeal, but he is coming to you with much enthusiasm and on his own initiative. And we are, now what you have to understand is, Titus, of course, was tasked to go back to Corinth and work on the fundraising. Paul says, planned that you should raise money. You've stopped. I want you to get back on it. We need to raise money. And so Titus was willing to go and just encourage that. And it was on his own initiative. No one had to force him. And it's a very good thing, by the way, even as a pastor, when you have, your team and people around you who, have that enthusiasm to do what God is calling them to do, the zeal, and they're able, without being provoked or pushed, their own initiative and say, you know what, Pastor, we can do this. We can do this. I'm willing to come and take up this. I'm willing to come and do this without anybody forcing them. And so, he says, and we are sending, verse 18, and we are sending along with him the brother who is praised by all the churches for his service to the gospel. What is more, he was chosen by the churches to accompany us as we carry the offering which we administer in order to honor the Lord himself and to show our eagerness to help. We want to avoid any criticism of the way we administer this liberal gift, for we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of men. And so what you just see here is Paul being very careful that, listen, with this liberal gift, we need accountability. And so Titus will, and we see later, Titus will represent me. There's a brother who is praised for his service, whom we are going to send for accountability, so that you don't think that the money you're going to give will disappear along the way. We need to be accountable. We need to be transparent. So Titus will come along. There's another brother who is praised for his service in the gospel. And that's a good thing, by the way, where, we need to begin praising people for the right things. Acknowledging one another for their service in the gospel. Today in the church, we praise men and women for the car they're driving and for the suit they're having and the red carpet and how everyone kissed their feet or how everyone is... And it's for the wrong things. I will tell you, in heaven, you'll be very shocked. They are unsung heroes. People who are not in the media, nobody knows. But they are serving the cause of the gospel. And the churches we are praising, this particular pastor, we don't know who he is. Paul says that he's also coming with Titus, and there'll be other brothers you'll see that the church also will nominate, and just for the purposes of transparency. And that's why even when I sent the money to Kidgum, we didn't have people, but I mean, and my even telling you is being transparent. The money came because I could have been quiet here. I said, please, who else wants to give towards the podium? Yet the money was already given, and more people are giving. And so 150, I get 500, and I only send 150. That is very dangerous. That's very dangerous, and it happens a lot in wedding meetings, where money for a suit is collected 10 times. That's very dangerous. Be transparent. Declare. Say, please, by the way, we have already got money for the suit. Now we are looking for money for the cake. Hey, by the way, we have already got 30% of the money. But you find that many times there's no transparency. And so, anyway, I told the pastor, that please send me a picture so that whoever has given is encouraged. And I said, please, the podium is here. So I have announced to you that the money has been. If you want to still support the pastor in another way, because they have so many needs, it's okay. So, the point here was transparency. It says the money is going, but listen, we'll send Titus who will represent me. There's another brother who will also come. And then also, we will have, later we'll have other people escorting the gift so that nobody says the money disappeared along the way. And then, what he says here is very important. He says in verse 20, we want to avoid, verse 20, we are taking this precaution so no one can find fault with us concerning this large sum of administration. A sum administered by us. Next verse. For we are making provision for what is honorable, not only before the Lord, but also before men. The NIV says, for we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of what? And this is the problem in the church today. We've taken a kind of direction where we say, God looks at the heart. I don't care what people think. God knows my heart. It is true. And what he's saying here is that it's true. You know, God looks at the heart. But people, men look on the outside. And Paul is careful that I want to do what is right before the Lord. I want to make sure my conscience is clear. I'm doing the right thing. I'm being accountable. We are being accountable. But also, for optics, people are watching. Certain things we do, in as much as you may be innocent, you create a very bad, or you send a very bad message to the public because of your carelessness. So this principle is not just about giving. It goes through every Christian arena. In fact, this is a very good verse. It's not about doing what is right before the Lord and say, I don't care, but that's their problem. They can climb a tree for all I care. God knows my heart. That's their problem. I will tell you this, but it says, I want what is right before God, but also before men. And that's why somewhere in Thessalonians, Paul says, keep away from every appearance of evil. You understand? Keep away from every appearance of evil. Is it possible for you to be renting a room and having a man or woman of the opposite sex in that room all alone with the doors closed and nothing happens? Is it possible? Of course it's possible. Nothing can happen. But when you walk out of that room, what will your neighbors say? It's your word against theirs. The optics are bad. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. Is it possible to sit in a nightclub and just drink soda without indulging in anything that, may be wrong, morally wrong? But I'll tell you this, it's very possible. But how does it look? As a Christian, a born-again Christian, sitting in a nightclub, drinking soda. The question is, what picture? And by the way, I don't understand, many Christians are in very compromising places, the table full of wine, and they're taking selfies. And you're wondering, posting it everywhere. You are stumbling. I mean, at least for goodness sake, between you and the Lord, fine. But why do you have to post it around and stumble everybody? Look at the beers on the table, and you are there, taking all those pictures. Very proud of yourself. You see, the thing is that you've got to be very careful. You've got to be very careful. Very careful. Very careful. Very careful. Very careful. Optics. The issue is, you're trying to keep away from every appearance. It might not be evil, but it looks evil. The way you dress, the way you conduct yourself could send a wrong message. You say, but I'm not a prostitute. You're right. And God knows your heart, but you are creating an impression that you are. You understand? I remember a friend of mine, a pastor, and the bank that day had told everybody to put on a multicolored, outfit. And he refused because the gay agenda and the gay rights movement, they have this whole thing of, I think it's the rainbow color or something. And he says, I may not be, but I can't. You understand? For example, you go to a place and they tell you in this town, in some places, a earring means nothing on a guy. In other places, they may tell you that a guy putting on maybe a earring on the left or putting on this or putting on this color shirt gives the impression that you are actually gay. Then why do you do it? Because the issue is this. You don't want to send out the wrong. Now, the truth is you can't please everybody. And that's the bottom line. But what we are saying, Paul is just saying something that you have got to try to be careful. That it's not about the Lord you are trying to please, but also men. You're trying to do what is right. You're endeavoring to do what is right before God and before man. And then he says, in addition, verse 22, we are sending with them our brother who has often proved to us in many ways that he is zealous, and now even more so because of his great confidence in you. As for Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker among you. As for our brothers, they are representatives of the church and an honor to Christ. So Paul had his own representative that was going to carry that gift eventually to Jerusalem. He says, Titus will represent me. Now you guys pick on people who will represent. The idea is, if I only nominated, you could think there's a conspiracy theory. This is my guy. I've appointed, and I whisper to him and say, you know what, along the way, you can do this or do that. Get these guys out of the way. Tell them to go and have a soda here, and you can help, take out something. The issue is being so careful that I have my representative, but at the same time, let the church also send. We have different people just for checks and balances. And this is a challenge for us as leaders. May God help us to work in such a way that there is so much transparency that nobody can talk. Verse 23 says, in fact, I'll go down to verse 24. Therefore, show these men the proof of your love and the reason for our pride in you, so that the churches can see it. We're now going to chapter 9. There is no need for me to write to you about this service to the saints, for I know your eagerness to help, and I have been boasting about it to the Macedonians, telling them that since last year, you in, how do you pronounce that? See that? I'm having a problem with that one. Huh? Achaia. Is that the right one? That you in Achaia were ready to give, and your enthusiasm has stirred most of them to action. So you had told these churches in Macedonia, these guys are willing to give, they are enthusiastic. And actually, their enthusiasm, the Corinthian church, stirred the churches in Macedonia to action. The guys jumped up, they got excited and began to give. Corinth was left behind. Because they had beef with Paul, Paul had issues with them, they all slackened the giving. And now he's saying, when we told them about your zeal, your excitement to give, it stirred them. And this is something for you to know. That your disposition towards the gospel, your attitude, even as individuals, will influence somebody positively or negatively. Even as a church. As a church. When you look at a church, we've traveled, my wife recently going to Tanzania, we've been to Europe and all that, but when we watch around, there are things you'll pick, things that rub on. You get excited. You say, if these guys are doing it, we can do it. We can do it. We can go back and change that. We can go back and change this. And that's what God intends. That when one church is on fire, that fire catches on to the next. And also, it can go the other way. That if you are, very lousy, lazy, and it can affect, one person can begin to, affect the rest negatively. It's the same thing also with the church. And normally you'll find that if one church, and many times I don't mean in the competition sense, it's very wrong. But if you imagine every church was on the streets, there are some churches that preach in the evenings out, and then you begin to say, you guys, we need to step up our game. But we are challenged. We are provoked. We need to we need to step up our game. You can't have other people preaching outside our church. Is it wrong? No. But we are the CCI evangelists. We are the witnesses. We should be out preaching. But guys are out there preaching, even down at the supermarket preaching. Everybody who's passing, which should be us. And so it should kind of provoke us and say, you know what? We can do better. We can do better. And so he's telling them, you guys, your enthusiasm had stirred most of them to action. But I'm sending the brothers in order that our boasting about you in this matter should not prove hollow or useless, but that you may be ready as I said you would be. Because, he had praised them so much that these guys are givers, are going to support Jerusalem. He's saying, please, I hope these brothers don't come to Corinth and find that there is no contribution. Or the contribution that has been collected is far less. Yeah? Someone says, you wait, I'm going to contribute. Makes noise. Your wedding is coming, you're going to see. Count me in. And he tells everybody, and you go praising everyone, telling your relatives, there's a brother who's going to stand with me, and time for the wedding, people are making pledges. Says, 5,000. What's the decoration? There's nothing wrong with the 5,000, but the noise he made, and he made so much noise that the noise and what he's giving doesn't match. And Paul was saying, I made so much noise about you guys. I said, you guys are going to give. You have shown this, the willingness and zeal to give. Now, the brothers are coming to collect the offering to take to the church in Jerusalem. I hope our boasting in you is not going to be in vain. You understand? And so, he says, verse 4, for if any Macedonians come with me and find you unprepared, and find you unprepared, we, not to say anything about you, would be ashamed of having been so confident. He says, if they come and find you not prepared, you have not collected, because I made noise that you people are going to collect for the church in Jerusalem. Leave alone yourselves, but us who made the noise are going to be ashamed. Are you seeing this? Sometimes leaders are under a lot of pressure. We go and make a lot of noise. I think for Kitgum we were very careful. We didn't make very many pledges. I made a pledge knowing that if there's an emergency, Pastor Matthew and I will share the bill. If the church doesn't come in, Pastor Matthew, otherwise, you can create a very big problem. Imagine that we are going to support you. Don't worry. Then from the 150 we send 10,000. We've not done them any favors. Now, verse 5 says, so I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance and finish the arrangements for the generous gift. You had promised. Paul was actually, Paul was basing on something they promised. He wasn't just imposing. He said, you guys promised. You made some pledges. And so I'm sending these guys to come quickly to you before that day to just make sure that we are ready. We are not disgraced. It says the generous gift you had promised. Then it will be ready as a generous gift, not as one grudgingly given. Then Paul now begins to provoke them into some truths to challenge their giving. And Paul says, let's now look at this. He says, remember this. The person who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And the person who sows generously will also reap generously. He's just now using a common sense principle based on people who understand sowing and reaping agricultural sense. He says, if you put seed down sparingly, that's what you're going to get. A harvest that is not as much as you expected. The more you put down, the more you will receive. And so he's giving them a general principle. Next one. So when he says, remember this, he's saying, as you give, this is something to keep in mind. Then he says, each person should do